Now, I could totally be alone in this thought, but in my opinion, I think these two horror films as a whole could possibly be two of the best out of the last decade. What is up, all of my horror fanatics out there? Welcome back. I'm the Jay Sloan, and I'm back here to do another video for you guys today. Now, I've been quarantined for 2 weeks, and since that quarantine, I've obviously been stuck in the house, and I've had all the free time in the world to watch plenty of movies, horror movies specifically. Now, I have watched some new horror films that I hadn't previously had the opportunity to see, and I've revisited a lot of old horror films or older horror films that I've really enjoyed and kind of always came back to over the years. And that's the case with these two films that I'm about to discuss now. These two films, in my opinion, flew under the radar. And the first one came out in 2009, and I was a really early collector at that point, and I was picking up anything horror, anything I could get my hands on that I could just experience, something that I could review and talk about on YouTube, and something that I could really indulge myself in, because horror was my main genre to collect. So, speaking of to collect, the film that I'm going to be talking about first is a 2009 horror film, and that is The Collector. Now, The Collector is directed by Marcus Dunstan, and it was, I believe, his directorial debut, but I could be completely wrong. Now, he was a writer for several horror films prior to this. He did some of the Feast films, if not all of them. He did some of the Saw films. In terms of writing, he has directed The Collector, the next one we're going to be talking about, another film that I can't remember the title of, and that I think he's set to direct The Collected if it ever arrives. So, when I watched this when I was a kid, I knew there was something special about the film, and I want to kind of talk about that before I dive into the plot itself. Not only were the traps good, but I felt like this was a revitalization in terms of a slasher film. Now, it could be looked at as torture porn. You could definitely say that it walks a thin line when it comes to that. There are so many bloody, disgusting. The gore in this is outstanding, in my opinion. It looks real, it looks intense, and it looks fucking brutal. Now, the main plot of the film really, you could say, revolves around the collector, but in my mind, it revolves around the main character of Arkin, played brilliantly, in my opinion, by Josh Stewart. Now, he's basically, we're led to believe in the beginning that he's a good guy, quote unquote, but as the film progresses, you see what his intentions really are with this house that he's working to kind of remodel and rebuild and fix up. He's actually been casing the place out, and he's, works for a higher up who wants him to rob a jewel within the house. Now, the job kind of gets speeded up a little bit because his wife owes some money to loan sharks, and she only has till midnight to pay it. So he has to speed the job up, and he knows the family that he's been working for has gone out of town, and it is his time to shine. It's his time to take care of his family, make sure his wife has her debt paid, and get what he needs to get. Now, he does so, and he goes inside the house, and soon he realizes that he is not alone within the house, and the family did not actually get to go on their vacation, that they are trapped within the house being tortured by a psycho collector. Now, the collector is an interesting character. He's one that's very vague, and that's what I kind of like about it. I think I'm drawn to that because a lot of horror franchises, and I'm calling this a franchise even though there's only 2 films, I have faith there'll be a third, and it will be great. So, a lot of horror franchises, they really emphasize on the characterization of the slashers themselves. Now, what I mean by that is you look at Freddy Krueger and how he was presented in later films, Nightmare 5, Nightmare 6, definitely Nightmare 6, he was extremely cheesy in that. But you get to know the backstory of the characters. Now, I think, in my opinion, that's when the story begins to slowly decline. And that doesn't always happen, but with this, it is beyond vague. He is one of the most tormented serial killers that I've seen on film, not tormented is not necessarily the word. He's one of the most demented killers that I've seen on film. He truly gets a pleasure of toying with his victims, with using their bodies as he pleases, and that kind of speaks for itself. He is a collector of people. He kills the ones he doesn't want, and he takes the ones that he does. And I think it's an interesting plot. I know the film, as it was being written, was supposed to be a prequel to the Saw franchise. Thank God that didn't happen. And it kind of morphed into something more. But the collector is vicious. I love his look. It's a very simple look. All black, black leather gloves, and the mask is really fucking weird. I'm not sure what it's made out of. I wish it could be leather. I'm sure that's something like that. But it fits it's molded to his face almost. It fits his face in a way that I don't think it would fit somebody else's face. You couldn't put the collector mask on Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees. It wouldn't look the same. And this guy has piercing, fucking soulless black eyes, and it's amazing. So the collector is great. Played brilliantly. I'm not really sure the guy's name. I can't pronounce it, so I'm sorry for that. But he played the collector amazing. Josh Stewart as the character of Arkin. Now, you're kind of torn because you like the guy. I resonate a lot with him as a guy who has a kid, and he has a wife that he wants to protect, and he would do anything to do that. You get the sense that he's made some bad mistakes over the course of his life, but he tries to correct those. And once he realizes that he is in the house with the collector and that it's not just him within the home, but it's the family who live there as well, you start to see his original plan disintegrate as he wants to save the family. It's not necessarily that he has to, because he doesn't. And there's actually a particular point in the film where he has an out. He literally is outside of the house. He can go on. He has the jewel that he needs to secure his wife's safety, but he sees the little girl from previously in the film, from earlier in the film. He sees the little girl, and it reminds him of his own daughter, and he just has to go back and save her. And I love that fact about him, and it makes you start to root for him. Another interesting thing about the movie is Arkin and the collector, the protagonist for intents and purposes, and the antagonist, they do not actually meet each other until over halfway through the movie, I would say, at least. Like, the collector doesn't really know Arkin's even in the house, which is amazing to me that he's that sly, he's that slick. He's a thief, so he's sneaky. He gets around the collector, and it's really a cat and mouse game without them even knowing it's a cat and mouse game. You have Arkin trying to save the father. And the father is actually the first person that he comes in contact with in the house, and that's played by Michael Raleigh Burke, which I want to say did an amazing job. And it was kind of captivating to watch him perform, because you could definitely see the fear on his face. The fear, the anxiety, the panic on his face, as he knows that not only he is in the house, but his wife is getting tortured in the next room, which leads me to her, Andrea Roth. She did an amazing job as well. And really, their only job was to portray fear. And that was kind of it. It was, they were shown briefly in the beginning of the film, and that was it. Throughout the rest of the movie, they're being tortured, they're being used, and they are showing fear, and they do it brilliantly. The thing that I think is funny about the couple itself is neither one of them seems to want to listen to Arkin, even though Arkin has the upper hand on the collector, so to speak. The collector doesn't even know he's in there. But so you have that dynamic. You have Arkin trying to save them, and comes close a time or two, and I won't spoil exactly what happens just in case you haven't seen it. But I like the dynamic between those two. I like the dynamic of the little girl. But when Arkin, finally does reveal himself to the collector, all bets are off. It's a game changer, and he really, it's intense. It gets really wild. The collector has one up on him. He has one up on the collector. It's back and forth, which leads me to another point that I want to talk about in this review, and that is the traps. I'm not a huge Saw guy. The traps in Saw, they don't do a lot for me. I think a lot of them are a little too intricate for my taste, and I think that they're maybe a little too, I don't know what the correct word would be, but they're just not my style. The traps aren't. In this one, they look like homemade booby traps, basically, and it's throughout the entire house, and that is when Arkin, he really knows what he's dealing with, and there's actually a scene where he picks a telephone up, puts it to his ear. There's like a pin or a nail within the phone, goes through the ear. Like, that's when he knows I've got to watch every single step that I take within this house. He doesn't know who he's dealing with toward the middle of the film. So I don't want to spoil all the traps, because I feel like if you haven't seen it, you need to experience some of those traps, because there's some gruesome fucking scenes. And I think it's directed, it's shot, and I think the practical effects are amazing as well. So they're all really well done. especially from a first-time director. So that's something I want to point out as well. And Marcus Dunstan, I believe this was his directorial debut, and if so, it was just, I mean, it was amazing. So, so we have all those dynamics. We have Arkin, kind of the light to the collector's darkness. We have the dynamic between the mother and the father, or the husband and the wife. We have the little girl, who I really liked her in the film. You could tell that she was terrified. The acting wasn't amazing from her, but it was good. And so we have all those dynamics. We have everything set from the start with Arkin trying to retrieve the jewel, to the end where Arkin doesn't really care about the jewel anymore. He needs it in the back of his mind, but he has to get this family out alive. And I think that's what makes him stand out from a lot of other protagonists in horror. I think he's probably one of the most courageous protagonists that you'll see, and not just that, but he is determined. He wants to live and he wants to get out of here, and he's a little bit more sly than the collector would like him to be. So I love the movie. I love the ending. I won't spoil it, but I think that it set it up perfectly. It set it up for a sequel, which they did eventually make, I think 2 years after. But it also set it up for nothing. It could have been left on this note, and this could have been a standalone horror film, and I think it would have been just as impactful, if not more. Everything from the acting, like I said, to the directing, to the special effects with the gore, the story itself, the progression with each character, mainly Arkin, the traps, the house, because a lot of the film takes place in one house. And you would ask yourself, that might get boring, but it really doesn't, because around each corner is a new trap and a new obstacle that our protagonist must face. So the collector, it's definitely up there. I love the movie, and rewatching it now, I hadn't seen it in probably 5+ years. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. It reminds me why I've always loved this movie. So the collector, I've talked about it quite extensively. So I think now it is time to move on to the collection. So in 2012, we received a sequel to the collector called The Collection. Now, picking this one up, I'd already been a fan of the collector series, and just the character and the movie in general. I'd watched it in 2009, I'd heard sequel news, I'd watched trailers, and then when this was finally released, I rushed to Walmart to pick up the DVD, and I got it. And putting it in, I was a little skeptical, because as you would be with any sequel, you never know if a sequel's really going to work. This one, in my opinion, did. Now, there were some aspects where it was a little bit watered down, as opposed to, I think the original was a near perfect horror film. I'm gonna be honest, a slasher, if you will, because I do consider them both slasher films and not torture porn. But popping it in, I didn't really know what I was going to get myself into. I just knew that Arkin better be a focal point, and that the traps need to be amped up, because we got the traps in the first one. We need more traps in this one, and we did get that. So Arkin is back here by Josh Stewart. It's directed again by Marcus Dunstan, starring Emma Fitzpatrick, Christopher McDonald. It's also got Lee Tergesen, I believe, in it. So, I mean, it's got a cast. Now, what this one does, you pick up, you're led to believe sometime after what happened to Arkin in the finale of the first film happened. You pick up with this character named Elena. You get a little bit of her backstory. So Arkin is still a lead in the film, but Elena is really the new focus. You get a little bit of her backstory about what she went through as a kid. She suffered a loss with her mother, and then a major loss when she was in a car accident with her father. It wasn't fatal, but it left both of them with issues that they would have for the rest of their lives. But you get to see Arkin, basically, there's on the news what the collector has done. He's one of the worst serial killers in the world at this point, or in history at this point. But nobody really knows where he is, and nobody knows where Arkin is. So as you can tell, the collector has collected Arkin. Then you kind of get led to this, I guess it would be like a rave, or I don't know exactly what you would call it, a party for kids. I'm not too intelligent when it comes to big parties like that, so I don't know if it was a rave or what, but you get led there. The collector is there planning some devilish plot, man. It's crazy what he does with all these kids. Elena actually is the one to let Arkin out of the box and free Arkin, and then throughout the rest of the movie, Elena is kidnapped, and we are led on a wild ride where there is like a spec ops team in a way. This guy who is going off the books, he's not involving the police. He works for Christopher McDonald's character, who wants to get his daughter back. And he says, you know, Arkin, lead us to where the collector was. You were the only person there in his home, in his lair, whatever you want to call it. So lead us there, and then we'll do the rest. We'll get Elena. So that's basically the overall plot of the film, is trying to find this girl. And then you've got a personal vendetta with Arkin, who he doesn't want to press the collector. He doesn't want to go. He wants to let it be, obviously, because he's been in that horrifying situation. But a matter of circumstance, and again, Arkin being a good character, once he gets there, he can't really leave because he needs to. He's forced into it at first, but at the same time, he needs to free this girl because he feels like it's his fault that she was kidnapped in the first place. So that's kind of where we're at with the collection. Now, it did feel a little bit bigger in terms of story. I mean, there was a lot more traps. The characters were multiplied. There was so many characters to follow in this movie, and it went back and forth between Arkin, Elena, Christopher McDonald a little bit. You had the Lee Tergesen group when they're split up from Arkin. So a little bit, you know, it was a little disjointed in areas, but I feel like it worked in other areas. I feel like the collector still brought the same presence. He has an ominous feeling. When he walks, you know it's the collector. There's a way that he moves. It's kind of like a way that Michael Myers moves. It's the shape. I mean, you know who it is right off the bat without even a second doubt. I mean, or second guess. It's just, that's the shape, and that's how I feel with the collector. There were some things in here was a little odd. There was some zombie-like creatures who were like amped up on drugs, and that's how the collector used them as basically like watchdogs. That was okay. It was a cool scene. You had some traps. You had a razor blade, pretty much like a net that picked somebody up that was covered in razor blades. There was plenty of traps in the movie, and it kind of, they worked. They amped it up. They amped the story up. They amped the stakes up with the multiple characters who would need to survive the film. And there was, you know, a lot of deaths, of course, with this team, and, you know, people who would just get picked off, and that's basically why they were there. But for the most part, I really enjoyed like Arkin's story. I thought Elena was an interesting character. She showed the same wit that Arkin had in the first film, and the perseverance. She showed the will to survive. And a lot of characters don't really do that in these films because they don't know what they're dealing with. But for those characters who can pick it up like that, know who the collector is, know what they have to do, and they have street smarts and the ability to do so, they persevere. They live for the most part. And like I said, I loved how personal it felt with Arkin in this one, and that leads to the main end of the film, which I won't talk about. Yeah, and you really get to see more of the collector. It's vague still. That's what I like about it. It's not, here's the collector, here's his backstory, here's why he does it, here's his name, here's his face. You don't get to see the collector in either film. You do not know what his face looks like. You see him from shots from the waist down. You see him from the back, where you see the back of his head. You do not see a front face. You don't know his name. You don't know where he comes from. And it's that, it's very conspicuous in the fact that who is the collector. Now, in the third film, will we see? I sure hope not. I hope they continue it on like that if we get a third film. But, I mean, the collection, it was good. And I'll link it in with the collector because I feel like they're one and the same. You can pop this one in, watch it, and then watch the collection. They're not too far from each other. The collection is a little bit more, is a little bit bigger in terms of story, traps, and everything that we've discussed. So I don't want to sound like a broken record and go over it again. But I enjoyed this one. I enjoyed this one a little more, but I like them both together, and I think they fit perfectly, perfectly together. It's if the third one comes out, it could just end as a trilogy, and I'm praying that one is as good as the first two. If not, you've got these two to watch, and I think I've babbled on enough about these cult hits. In my opinion, I think that they're overlooked. I think not a lot of people talk about them, and I do feel like the collector could have been the next major horror icon. I just think maybe it was a product of advertisement. Maybe it wasn't advertised well enough, and I still know some horror fans who don't even know about this film. It flew under the radar for a lot, and I think that's such a shame because I think that this movie is definitely a cult hit in my opinion. I think in 20 years from now, people are going to be looking at this in the same way that they look at a film kind of like Maniac in a way, because Maniac is underrated as well, but it's a cult hit, 1980 Maniac, and I think that this is kind of going to be in the same vein. And you know, the collection maybe didn't do so well at the box office, is why we haven't received a third one in some time. But I'm praying that that changes soon. You know, so that has been my in-depth talk, and probably fucking boring you guys to death about the collector and the collection. I would definitely recommend to watch these two if you haven't. If you haven't seen them, pick them up. You'll probably get them for cheap. Hell, you can probably watch them on a streaming service if you don't want to buy the DVDs, but they're definitely worth it. Yep. And there we go. The collector, the collection, underrated horror, in my opinion. Comment down below. Let me know what you think about these films. Are they underrated? Are they overrated? Do you think people talk about them too much? I don't know how you would get that, because I don't think anybody talks about these movies very much at all. But did you like them? Did you love them? Did you hate them? Comment down below and let me know why. I'm the Jay Sloan. Thank you guys so much for watching. And comment and subscribe. And as always, guys, keep it horror. Peace.